Govinda. Narayan. Verse 34, was it? 32. Jai Ma. Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devyamatrik Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindevyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Dharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupini Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Yate Namaha Om Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharamajamasmarachara Prayantam Vande Gurum Paramparam Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Deva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Om Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhadra Kali Kapalini Durga Kshama Shivaratri Sahasranāma Stute Shri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namahari Om Tatsat Jai Guru Jai Guru Jai Ma. So, is this a little high? Is it loud or is it okay? I'm just in a weird sweet spot, I think. It's okay? Okay. I think I'm just in the exact spot where it's okay. Hari Om Tat Sat. Actually, I should probably. It's alright. After. So last week we revered Swami Devanandaji Maharaj from the Vedanta Society spoke on Holy Mother, which is perfect. Every time he comes, we pretty much get him to speak on Holy Mother. It's kind of our topic, his topic here. And but of course, he was thinking. We were all thinking it was Holy Mother's birthday the previous. I think by date that same day, but by Tithi the previous Wednesday. So he had been giving talks on Holy Mother, so it was fresh in his mind. It was so beautiful. But the week before that, we were on verse 31 of the Kali Sahasranāma, the 1,000 names of Kali, and we had not quite finished. We were at the last two names. We didn't quite finish it. This verse. Of course, we can think of it, and I can fall into this as I'm trying to finish a verse. But the verses are just lists of names, so we really should just do names until we get to it. But it's very hard not to think, try to finish the verse, but that's the way I tend to think of it. śuddhā taraṇginī, medhā, lākinī, bahu-rūpiṇī, sthūlā sūkṣma-tarā, bhagavatyanurāgiṇī. Anurāginī. So, and the previous, I don't think I have it here, but the previous verse was when Jaya and Vijaya, and which we interpreted in a way to refer to Ida and Pingala, and that the gatekeepers and in between, and then the Nadi Samudra, I think was it, the river or the stream and the ocean, also referring. So this section we've interpreted as referring to things to do with the chakras and the sūkṣmā and the experiences when mapped in yoga and tantra at the thousand petal lotus top of the head. Although each name stands by itself also. It can be interpreted in different ways. But because of the cluster, and another thing, in the middle of this is this one name, lākinī. Lākinī. Lākinī is the deity, the Devi who sits in the Swadhisthana chakra, Manipura chakra. And so that's also dealing with the chakras. And in 2 verses from now, there's going to be a lot of the other Devis that sit in the other chakras. So once again, just justifying the interpretation to interpret these names as dealing with the chakras and experiences at the higher chakras. So śuddhā means that pure, which could refer to the experience at Sahasranāma, the most pure essence of the śuddhā. And we described it as sattva śuddhā or śuddhā sattva, that the purity beyond, the purest of the pure beyond the regular guna of sattva. And taraṇginī means that which is in waves, right? Lākinī, bahu-rūpiṇī, she has many forms. We spend so much time. Sthūlā, sūkṣmā. And then that she who is the gross and the subtle. We spend quite a bit of time on that. The gross and the subtle. Another way to think of that is observer and the observed, the thinker and the thought, the changing, the unchanging, that type of. She's both these things. And then sūkṣma-tarā. That's where we left off. Where are we here? Let's see. Sūkṣma-tarā. So taraṇginī, she who is wave. Sūkṣma-tarā, she who is subtle, the subtle wave. That's pretty much kind of where we left off. We not really discussed it, but sūkṣma-tarā, that the most subtle. So if interpreting, if you can remember back, we were saying that this the ocean described as nadi samudra. This ocean is we can conceive of it as this pure non-dual ground of being or pre-being, the existence itself, right? And within that there seems to be, or there actually is, or we think there is, depends on the different schools will interpret it differently. Advaita holds one view, Tantra holds another view like this. That there seems to be some stir, some vibration, so in Tantra they call the spanda, a pulse, a bija, a seed, or a drop, some beginning vibration. That beginning vibration, that when it says taraṇginī, she who is waves and ripples, right? Here's sūkṣma-tarā, so she's the most subtle ripple. So this could be from that's the very beginning from which everything comes, but interpreted as the ascent rather than the descent of consciousness. The ascent of consciousness, we're trying to get subtler and subtler and subtler. The more subtle our thinking, the more subtle our perception, the closer we are to catch that subtle beginning, the first movement in consciousness. We quoted, I think, a few 2 weeks ago also this one. I don't have it in my memory. I didn't have it last time either, but I know the purport of the verse, the Upanishadic verse. It says that Brahman is the most subtle, right? And so usually we think, Brahman can't be perceived, right? He says, but it can't. But actually, in this Upanishad says it can be perceived, with the extremely subtle mind, right? And therefore, that's the purpose of sadhana, meditation, awareness, these type of practices, are to make the mind subtler and subtler and subtler, so that we can catch that most subtle thing, the most subtle movement, the first pulse. Right? Another thing in Sri Ramakrishna described japa and meditation to be like. One thing he said is it's like you follow the meditation on Om. This is when I was chanting the long drawn out Om just now, I was thinking, we've never really talked, not in a long time, talked about Om. We're not going to talk about Om right now, but a little bit is that the sound, when you say the symbol of Om has, that symbol is a mystical symbolic letter, but then it has a chandra and a dot, the bindu. That dot is the dot in the middle of a yantra. This is that subtle wave, that first pulse, right? And so that from that dot, everything from that dot beyond which there's nothing. There's the one thing and the no thing, or the everything, and then it becomes manifested through sound, also represented by my ma's garland of heads, how the different sounds come. From the one sound, the pure soundless sound, to the purest sound, the one sound that becomes, like when you say Om, Aum, all possible sounds are there. So all the vowels express sound, and then consonants are the breaks of those vowels, and then words are made of vowels and consonants together. Bit by bit, the whole world of manifestation comes, right? But we can trace it. But so that's how everything comes from the bindu, or in the Sri Yantra, everything comes from the yantra, from the bindu of the yantra. Today I have a yantra, I have a visual aid. The bindu of the yantra, everything comes out, right? But in sadhana, that's philosophy. We see how theology or philosophy, how the one has become many, or the one or the transcendent has become immanent, or how supreme consciousness become trapped as us and muladhara, as in worldly concept, however we think of it. But sadhana is reverse tracked, right? So we're trying to go back to the bindu the way back. And so even the chanting of a mantra like Om is a method. Any legitimate sadhana is a method to make the mind subtle. But Om is a perfect example, because when you chant Aum, when you do that there's a nasal quality that the yogis focus on that allows to trail off. Or the sound gets more and more subtle and kind of buzzes off into non-existence. You never know exactly where it stops. At some point, you're no longer making noise. There is, in manifested sound, you could probably mark it using equipment or something, exactly when the stomp sounds. But practically speaking, you can't. If you follow it, you can, in a certain sense, you can imagine it going back into the bindu. There's a mantra. Shankaracharya wrote a hymn it's attributed to Shankaracharya on the Panchakshari mantra. It describes each of the syllables of Namah Shivaya, right? Each Nam Na Karaya. It's a beautiful hymn. The boys of our ashram. It's in my mind. I'll think of the boys of our ashram chanted. But we don't say Namah Shivaya. We say Om Namah Shivaya. So Om is there. So he didn't. So often the word the mantra for Om is also included. But that he didn't write. That's considered. I have not found. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's always. That's a Vedic mantra. It's always stated. Although I don't know. Our Swami Omananda, our Guruji, quotes it a lot. Om Karabindu Samyuktam. Om. I have to see if I remember it. Om Karabindu Samyuktam. Nityam Yogit. Nitya Dhyayata Yoginaha. Kamara Mukshiram Chaiva. Om Karayanam. I got it. Om Karayanam. It's been a long time. Om Karayanam. Om Kara Bindu Samyuktam. Nitya Dhyayata. What did I say? Om Karabindu Samyuktam Nityam Dhyayata Yogina, something like that. The yogis always meditate on Omkara. Omkara, all right? Bindu, that with the bindu. Right? So it's like the yogis are all eternally, all the time, without break, meditating on Omkara, or the Om mantra, with the bindu. Bindu Samyuktam, united with the bindu, connected with the bindu. So it's not just chanting Om, it's meditating on the bindu. Om, focus to the bindu, which is trying to find that the where the sound disappears into, from the gross sound, articulated speech, to the more subtle sounds, to the movement and consciousness, to pre-consciousness, to the very where does it sound first come from, and where does it go into? It's hard to find out where it comes from. We can reverse it and find out where it goes into. Like when you say any word, this is actually true of any word. You're not thinking a word, then you think of a word. And then somehow or another, you say the word, right? Where did it come from, right? You can trace it back. It's very hard to know where it comes from, right? We don't know where our thoughts come from and our words come from, right? But we can maybe catch where they go. Maybe there's just a trick, right? Because where they go and where they come from is the same thing, right? It comes, a sound or a thought comes into being and then ceases to be, right? And so there's a space in between those, right? I haven't got to my notes yet, so please forgive me, but this is very interesting. I didn't think I was going to talk about sūkṣma-tarā, but this is, I think, important. In the verse in the Gita, it says that all beings, everything in this world, or all beings, are strung on me like strings, like pearls on a thread, right? The sutra is the word, right? So these aren't threads, but this is, so we see the beads, right? But what we don't see is what's throughout the beads. What the beads are strung on, that's a thread. But theoretically, you could, if you paid attention, you can like, oh, let's in between these two types of beads, there seems to be a little gap, and if I look really carefully, maybe even accentuate it, and make a crease there, you can actually see the string. So he says everything is strung on me. We see everything, we don't see him, right? So how to see him? And so in between everything, where there's a gap in between everything. There's every thought, everything, every name, every form exists in consciousness, right? Consciousness is within it also, but we don't see consciousness, right? But we can. So when you say a mantra, or you say, or your thought of your meditational focus, you say a mantra. You say the mantra, we say, oh, that mantra is God. That mantra is Ma's. Ma's name is not different from Ma. That's true, right? And then mantra ends, and then you say the mantra again, and the mantra ends, and you say the mantra again, right? So we're trained, and we should to try to learn to focus on the mantra, just on the sound, the holy sound, or the transformative, holy, beautiful sound that is the rupa, the sound form of the Divine Mother. But what about in between? Our problem is that usually in between the two thoughts we want is 1,000 other thoughts we don't want, that we can't control. We say, like example, Om Namah Shivaya, and then before we say Om Namah Shivaya, we've thought, I don't want to say Om Namah Shivaya anymore, or like I'm sleepy, Om Namah Shivaya, I'm sleepy, Om Namah Shivaya. It's like whatever, so many thoughts come, right? That's our problem. So if we train ourselves to focus on the thought, on the mantra, the thought of the mantra, and not think anything else, right? And no other thought is there. Then in between mantras, what's there? There's no other thought, right? Then we can catch that in which the thought rises, in which it exists, in which it goes, right? We can catch that gap, right? That's the bindu samyuktam. The yogis meditate on the bindu. So we focus on the sound, on the nama and rupa of the mantra and of the deity, but also what's in between. This is just a training. This is a technique, an important technique, how to make the mind subtle. I believe sūkṣma-tarā could mean this also, this very subtle way. Yeah. And that kind of ties some of the things. Sūkṣma-rūpa, sthūlā, she who is gross, sūkṣma, who is subtle, and sūkṣma-tarā, she was the first movement, we can catch it. So then it kind of switches into another beautiful name, Bhagavati. Bhagavat actually is a sandhya, it says, Anurāginī. So two names, Bhagavati and Anurāginī. So we'll do Bhagavati. So Bhagavati, we know this word in its masculine form or its neutral form. I'd say neutral form, but it has a masculine tendency, as Bhagavan. Like Gita Bhagavan Uvacha, right? The Lord, the blessed Lord said, right? You know how we translate, God said, or the personality of Godhead says, so whatever people translate it in a different way, the Lord said, Bhagavan. So we have to think, what is Bhagavan? And so she's described, Ma is described as Bhagavati. Bhagavati in a certain sense is a simple Bhagavati is the feminine form of Bhagavan. Just like you have Ishvara. Ishvara means God, it has a specific meaning, but so Ishwari is goddess. Or if Raja means king, Rajeshwari, or like there's a queen. Raja Rajeshwari is the queen of queens, or like the empress. It's a feminine. It's a clearly feminine thing. So it's a simple thing as we're referring to. You wouldn't say. You'd say, oh, the goddess. You say the goddess Kali, right? You could say God, the god Kali, and by God, and I think that's an appropriate thing. By God simply means the supreme being, controller, sustainer. Whatever attributes you mean God, and to say that she's God, I think is very accurate, right? But there's something about saying she's the goddess also, right? To use that language, I think, is also important. So we develop. So first, what does Bhagavan mean? So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's in the very beginning, close to the beginning, in the first skanda, in the second chapter of the first skanda, there is I think a foundational verse, right? Vedanti tatva vidha tattvam yaj jnana advayam brahmeti paramameti bhagavan iti shabdyate. The learned Vedanti, those who know tattva vida, the ones who know the truth, the learned ones, the educated people, but those who have experienced the truth, they understand jnana advaita. They understand the non-dual one, the one being, right? The one that doesn't have a second, the one being. They describe it in three ways, right? It says as Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, and Bhagavan. As Brahman, as Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Right? These are three features. You could say sometimes the language is three features. That's okay. I think it's not exactly right either, but we can use other translations of this verse. I use that they understand it and they have three features, right? So, here this verse says that Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are the same being. They refer to the same reality, the one non-dual reality. So we have to think what that is. But what is Brahman? Brahman, usually when we say Brahman, this is I can't use this word, but like impersonal aspect, the formless aspect, or that which is beyond form or beyond conceptions of that's inconceivable. The root of the word Brahman comes from this term that to expand, or that's really, really, really big. You can think of it. Bigger than big is infinitely big. Is Brahman. So sometimes we translate it as the absolute. It's tricky when you say the absolute because Bhagavan is also the absolute, the name for the absolute, and Paramatma is also a name for the absolute. So these words have taken on a loaded meaning beyond their actual lexicon meaning. But so Brahman we think of the that which is, I can't say beyond because then you're still put into a hierarchy. Be careful not to put into a hierarchy. The nature we say, the ground of being or being itself. Maybe that's a good way to describe it, perhaps. Back to a discussion we had a few mornings ago here, where it's one you could perhaps describe Brahman as being itself, the reality itself, right? Paramatma is the supreme Atman, the supreme self, right? And so another thing, so this is like we all have a self, a sense of self. We don't quite know what it is. We say I, we feel I. Beyond the ego says I all the time. The ego screams I, look at me, but behind that there's something that's shining through the ego saying I, right? So there is some I-ness, some sense of some source of consciousness, right? Now the question is whether that's eternal, whether it's changing, whether it lasts over time, whether it lasts between bodies. These are different religions, and even our religion says 50 different things on this, right? This is not the point. But there's that. So by saying Paramatman means that beyond that there's a, you have to read what Pada means. Simple meaning Pada means supreme being, or universal being, or the beyond so we have beingness. We seem to be an individual being, whatever that is, whatever that the quality of that is. But God is like the supreme amongst those beings. That's one way to think of it, right? Amongst selves, he's the supreme self. But that's another thing. He's usually, this Paramatma idea is like he has become all the different selves, right? So sometimes, like in the Hare Krishna literature, they say it's a localized Lord, right? The Lord that God God has entered every atom and every person as like the self of their self. Right, we have individuals have an existence, but our existence is still dependent upon God's existence, or the divine existence, the supreme existence. So this is different ways, but the philosophical understanding, the Upanishadic philosophical understanding of Brahman is one thing, but try to realize, like when what is yoga? So you still the mind, you still the chitta, and then the self, the Atman shines in its awareness shines in its own glory. Right, that realization, the goal of the yogic tradition, you could say the goal of Vedantic inquiry could be Brahman, perhaps, if it's overly simplified, but in a general way. The goal of yogic practice is the Atman, or the Paramatman. We're trying to find the self, who we are, and then the thing is whether or not that we're an individual self, or that our individual self is the one self. Then it opens up. Classical yoga says, I'm a little self. And there's unlimited multiple selves, right? But in the Vedantic kind of interpretation of yoga, we'd probably stretch that to like there's one self appearing as many selves, or one self behind all individual selves, some sort of language like that. So Brahman and Paramatman, and then the third one is Bhagavan. So usually here Bhagavan means as like God, the Godhead, not Godhead. That's the wrong use. Godhead is more the ground of being conception. We think of the personal. When we think of God in the Christian sense, the creator, sustainer, there's a being. It's not just being itself. There's a being, right? That we name that his name is God, or his name is Krishna, or actually we know we have 1,000 names. First one is apparently she who dwells in the cremation ground. The first name in this list, right? Right. She has a lot of names, or he has a lot of names, right? But there is a being. It's not just being itself, but there's a being, the one who is. We think of the controller, the creator, the sustainer, the one whose will somehow creates the universe. Theism uses this language. The theistic idea of God, you could say, something like that. So Paramatman, Brahman, Paramatman, and Bhagavan. In a conversation, Sri Ramakrishna was on the boat ride with Keshav Sen and Vijay Krishna Goswami, which paintings over there, and he's on his way there. A very important section in the Katamrita, also in the Gospel, it's there. In it, one of the things he says, Thakur says, well, she's talking about Kali. You have to remember that he's talking about Kali, and he says that she is the Vedantis, the Jnanis, actually he uses the word, the Jnanis Brahman, the Yogis Atman, here means Paramatman, and the Bhaktas Bhagavan. Right, it's like, so it's a similar thing, they're the same thing. He's saying his own language, it's almost a direct quote from the Bhagavatam, even though it's not exactly a quote, but by idea, it's almost a direct quote. But he says she is that reality, right? She's the same reality is there. So similar to what we're saying here. So Brahman is the absolute beyond qualities in general. Paramatma is the self of all beings in general, and Bhagavan refers to the personal aspect of God as Lord, Creator, Sustainer, like that, right? So she's Bhagavati. So she basically saying she's Bhagavan. So I think what we have to think what this word really means. Sri Ramakrishna, whenever you read in the Gospel, when he's talking about God, right? God is like this. God appears in many forms. God has created all the religions. God, one should, when longing comes for God, then God is real. It is like this language. Usually he's either using the word Ishvara or Bhagavan, right? But he uses very often. He's describing Kali, right? But then he uses the word Ishvara and Bhagavan. He doesn't say Ishwari or Bhagavati. Right, unless sometimes when you're talking specifically about the goddess Kali, then you'd say the goddess Kali, right? But usually when he's talking about Kali, he's using the more general idea that we think of God, right? So Ishvara has a technical meaning. In common language, it means controller or Lord, right? Lord is a political term, not a philosophical term, but anyways. But you know what we mean by this. But it means specifically, philosophically, it means that he, she, it, they, that... that creates, sustains, and destroys, and reveals and covers, right? These are the five-fold aspects of Bhagavan, right? Of Ishvara, and so Bhagavan has a similar meaning. Bhagavan has a specific meaning. Let's see here. So in the Vishnu Purana, this is the classical definition, right? Aishvarasya Samagrasya Viryasya Yashaya Shriyaha Jnana Vairagyoschayevaha Sanham Bhaga Itingana. There's two syllables, Bhaga. So Bhagavan is the Lord who has bhagas. So what is the bhagas? His defining what bhaga means. Bhaga means 6 attributes or 6 glories, right? And actually the word bhaga sometimes has this meaning of like glories or I don't know another better word for this. And so what are those six glories? There's dominion, might, means strength, right? Glory, splendor, wisdom, dispassion. Right, this is a list. There's other lists. Sometimes they list like so. He's all another more classical way. Very often you'll hear in other literature a little lighter version of this is like got power, beauty, renunciation, intelligence, knowledge, wealth, right? So and fame. It's kind of these are kind of our more common English ideas of these more subtle points. And so we all have some of those powers. We have a little bit of fame or infamy. We have some intelligence. We maybe a little bit of renunciation, some beauty, but we don't have that much. We're not all that. We're that, but not all that, right? So he or she here who has those things in full, or most, right? One who possesses these six qualities, all six qualities, or all six qualities extremely. That is called Bhagavan. So it's an interesting thing. Really, when we say oh Lord Krishna, it says Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Lord Krishna. We don't need to think because he's called Bhagavan because he's so beautiful. He's the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most learned, the most famous, and the most renounced, the most powerful. But that's actually what's. It doesn't. He's the most God. These are God qualities. But the thing is, these are qualities everybody has. Everything has. We have in small amounts. So it's interesting. Like renunciate. Like some of them like beauty, right? So I've told the story before. It's an interesting. I remember it a lot. Years ago, many years ago, in Laguna Beach Hare Krishna Temple, summertime, there was a guest Swami named Jayadvaita Swami, and he's a very talented speaker, And I always liked his speaking style. And so it's a Sunday feast, so there's a lot of people, and it's a beach community. It's right on the beach, right? So it's its own. People aren't dressed for the temple. People are dressed off the beach, and they're encouraging. They're trying to get youth to come in, take prasadam, listen to a lecture. This is how you expose the religion to the young generation, right? But he was speaking. So I forget the point, and at that time, a very by cultural standard triggers, a very beautiful girl came in off the street and was in the back of the row, and she was dressed for the beach, let's say, not for the temple, right? And naturally, everyone's mind, right? Literally everybody, some people's minds, because she was attractive, other in mind like, oh my God, how could you be dressed like this? Or oh my God, stop looking at him, or whatever, look at her, whatever. There was everybody's mind. Everybody's mind was switched to her beauty, right? She was good or bad. People were conscious of her perceived beauty, right? And you could see he lost the crowd immediately. He was keeps talking and just realizing, what am I do? And then in the middle, so he was able, within his talk, he says, just see, there are so many beautiful people and beautiful things in this world. So, and he says there's so many beautiful, handsome men, so many beautiful, lovely women, right? And of course, people like, he's on to us, like that. I think, he says, just think how beautiful Krishna is, who's the source of all beautiful people. And slowly he got everyone's attention more or less back. And I don't remember the talk, but I remember this it was a good technique to catch people's attention. But that's the point, is that God is more, if there's beauty, where does beauty come from? He's a source of beauty. He must be so much more beautiful. This is that sentiment behind it, right? The most beautiful, when he possesses these things in extreme, right? Even renunciation is an attractive thing. People who have power and don't care about it, right? That's a very attractive thing. Anyways, you can see people are famous, people are beautiful, people are intelligent, powerful, so Bhagavan means that. So by saying she's Bhagavati means she's powerful, she's beautiful, or she possesses these things in full, she's renounced, she's knowledgeable, like that, or she's these things. So that's what we mean. Often when we mean in common language, when we say God, we don't necessarily mean who creates, sustains, and destroys, and covers and reveals, right? Sometimes we mean he's the most wonderful, the devotional. So Bhagavan is the Lord, is the Lord for the devotee, or the God of the devotee, because these are things that these are attractive qualities, right? These are things that we. One of my friends at OCC coined the term the omni-wonderful qualities, We have like omnipotent, omniscient. We have all the God is omni-wonderful, right? The things that the most wonderful of all qualities. This text describes traditional six. So Bhagavan or Bhagavati, he or she or it that possesses these six qualities in full. Right. So this word bhag comes from the word bhag itself comes from the word bhaj, comes from a similar root. Bug and bhaj both come from bhaj, from the same thing. And bhaj means to worship, right? My name has the word bhaj in it, right? So it indicates the object of worship. So you can have Ishvara, the God who creates, sustains, destroys, covers, and reveals, right? But it doesn't necessarily that you love him or her, right, and worship him or her. So Bhagavan is that reality when worshipped, as an object of worship, right, connected to worship. The worship. So sometimes Bhagavan we can translate as the worshipable Lord. I think it's a better word than just the Lord, right? So sometimes in my translations, I often use like the Blessed Lord said, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, because blessed means the possessor of blessed qualities, the qualities that focus our mind like this. So Bhag is the object of our personal. Bhag is or Bhaj, and therefore Bhagavan is the object, he or she who's the object of our personal devotion. And that makes sense. That fits the Bhagavatam definition, and it fits Sri Ramakrishna's definition. Okay. But we also have, maybe you've heard, if you've read or anything about Ramana Maharishi, it says Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Right? So does Bhagavan mean that he's possessor of the six qualities? Right? So it could be people, it's an exuberant, you could give somebody the title Bhagavan saying, he's God incarnate. He's the original God. He's the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most wonderful. Right? And so a lot of times it's attached to names of saints or charismatic figures by their disciples in order to accentuate the claimed divinity, right? But actually, that's actually not the way it's properly used. When you say Bhagavan Sri Ramana, although he may be the Supreme Lord incarnate, I don't have the insight to judge that, but he didn't claim to be, and his disciples didn't claim him to be. They used the title because he was a sage of highest wisdom. And so there's another definition of Bhagavan is one who is a title for a sage. When we say Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, we actually mean both. We say like Bhagavan Sri Krishna is like the Lord Krishna. We believe he is that worshipable God in human form. It's the avatar in this of Sri Ramakrishna. But it's also an appropriate name when Swami Vivekananda would, in his writings, Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, said, right, or I'm sending you my brother disciple. He was well trained. He was loved by our master Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna. Often in that common use, he was a sage of the highest realization, right? Actually, I didn't have you.